But continuing with the unresolved matters in 1993 that are still a consequence to 9/11, even although we spent considerable time covering the profiles of the Trade Center bombing conspirators, there are quite a few things overlooked in the early news coverage on the investigation, added with peculiar circumstances in the way these suspects, even though guilty in a conspiracy to carry out terrorist bombings, were often portrayed in their motivation, plannings, knowledge, and capability disproportionately within the media. Like Mohammed Salameh, after the attacks, investigators had believed in the probability due to his ancestral region that he may have been related to Ali Hassan Salameh, the so-called Red Prince of the Black September, intricately behind the 1972 Munich massacre. Salameh is currently an inmate in ADX Supermax. The Palestinian, Nadel Ayyad, why did he take credit for the 1993 World Trade Center bombing as the Liberation Army 5th Battalion?
The letter claiming responsibility for the World Trade Center explosion is raising new questions tonight. The letter, sent to the New York Times 4 days after the blast, was reportedly written by one of the 4 men arrested in connection with the bombing. But the president of the Arab-American Relations Committee, MT Mehdi, says the letter was not written by a Muslim fundamentalist or a religious person. He says the letter didn't make the appropriate references to God.
With the title incorporating Liberation Army, would be more indicative of an Arab revolutionist struggle or resistance movement rather than exclusively Islamic. Perhaps that also might explain why the ripped-up photo of Ayyad in the garbage outside his home, posing with a grenade beneath the Palestinian flag, would be more representative of rebellions or uprisings in the First Intifada, 1987 to 1993 in the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and within Israel at that time, and certainly not demonstrative of anything to do with fighting the Russians in Afghanistan. Nadel Ayyad is apparently serving his life sentence in a federal penitentiary in Terre Haute, Indiana. And then there's Mahmoud Abouhalima, the Red. Again, one of the few who was able to flee just days after the bombing. He was later apprehended in Egypt by authorities and found in possession of a book on the rapid demolition and destruction of buildings in his residence before being extradited back to the U.S. It's highly suggested from investigative authorities on the matter that Abouhalima was the only conspirator and getaway vehicle for Nosair during the Kahana assassination, since he was also a taxi driver. However, in 2010, while investigative reporter Peter Lance was writing an article in Imad Salem for Playboy, he had also discovered that FBI interviewed El Sayed Nosair in 2005, where he had stated that he was accompanied by 2 conspirators as his getaway for the Meir Kahana assassination, one of them being Mohammed Salameh, and the other being the livery driver Bilal Al-Qazi. Furthermore, Lance had also learned that year from a series of standard FBI interviews known as 302 memos within the trade bomb investigation that Nadel Ayyad admitted to being the getaway driver as part of a trio that carried out the assassination of Mustafa Shalabi with both Salameh and Al-Qazi. From Lance's further analysis on what the FBI truly uncovered about Al-Qazi leads him to believe that Bilal was the actual New York ringleader in the Trade Center bombing, not Mahmoud Abouhalima. But regardless of Abouhalima's true role, in 1981 he first moved to West Germany from Egypt. Time magazine did a whole spread about him, as well as the gist of the 1993 conspirators on October 4th, 1993. In the Time magazine article, Abouhalima later recounted that in Germany he had lived a life of corruption, girls, drugs, you name it. After being denied political asylum there in 1982, he quickly married a nurse from Munich named Renee Soika, so he could remain in the country. She had the impression that he had worked in some kind of underground movement from the frequent groups of Egyptian guests visiting their apartment discussing politics in Arabic, but suspected nothing criminal. Unwilling to convert to Islam, Abouhalima then divorced Soika 3 years later, while eventually marrying another woman named Marianne Weber in a Muslim ceremony, and then eventually moving together to Brooklyn in 1986. He is serving his life sentence at ADX. And there's a lot of mystery behind Ayyad Ismoil, who was 23 years old at the time of the Trade Center bombing and known to Nadel Ayyad as Rashid's friend. In October 1989, Ismoil came to the United States on a student visa, enrolling in an intensive English language program at Wichita State University in Kansas. Ismoil's co-workers and acquaintances recalled him as not particularly bright, nor did he have any strong political or religious feelings. Very westernized, he liked hamburgers and cowboy movies, and he was briefly married to a tall blonde American beauty, as he described to his family. However, if there ever became a motive for Ismoil's willingness to carry out a terrorist attack as a false pretext against Saddam and Iraq, then Ismoil would certainly become the candidate with an axe to grind by 1991. Ismoil's father had been an operator at the Kuwaiti National Petroleum Company. He was able to support Ismoil financially, but after the Iraq invasion, the entire family left to Jordan. The PLO supported Saddam at that time, as did many Palestinians living in Kuwait. After the war, Kuwait did not generally allow Palestinians to return, so Ismoil's father thus lost his job, and in Jordan, it was impossible for him to earn what he had been making in Kuwait. Without his father's support, Ismoil could not pay his tuition and he dropped out of school. He left Kansas in 1991 for New York to stay with an uncle and cousin, both cab drivers. After a brief stint driving a taxi, he moved later that year to Dallas to work at a restaurant owned by a family friend. In December 1992, he was contacted by Ramzi Youssef, with whom he relocated to New York City on February 22, 1993 to begin preparing the Trade Center bomb. Ismoil was traceable through phone records made between him and Youssef, and also being on the same passenger manifest once fleeing after the Trade Center bombing, meaning that Youssef didn't return to Pakistan afterward as simply expressed in the official narrative, that instead he first went directly to Jordan before returning home to Pakistan. Ismoil is currently serving his life sentence in Lee U.S. Penitentiary in Pennington Gap, Virginia. And then when it comes to the most clearest organizer for the Trade Center bombing, surprisingly, the Egyptian-born Palestinian El-Sayed Nosair was born in 1955 in Port Said, Egypt, and immigrated to the United States in 1981, first moving to Pennsylvania working odd jobs, and eventually moving to New Jersey in 1985. He became an American citizen in 1989. He is serving his sentence at the Big Sandy U.S. Penitentiary in Kentucky. There's still a little bit more to cover about him, but regarding his cousin Ibrahim El-Gabrowny, who has a limited sentence, his current whereabouts as far as where he's incarcerated is unknown.